First of all, thank you all for coming on a full day at 3 p.m. with the gorgeous view outside, and it's very pretty outside, so thank you for being here. We're going to talk about the impact of advanced technologies on digital enterprises and the digital economy. And what I ask my fellow panel members is to look out a few years out, what they think the impact would be. You know, maybe 3, 5, maybe a little bit longer, depending on what they're looking at. And because of that, I wanted to make sure that we had a couple of young MIT researchers. Michael, I'm not saying you're not young, but they're younger.
I'm not a researcher, though, that's for sure.
A couple of young MIT researchers, because in the end, this is their world, and I'll tell you about them in a second. And then we have Michael Macrie, who is one of the finalists in 2018 in the CIO. He was one of the CIO finalists. And we have Madhav Kumar, and Madhav got his PhD in the Sloan School. He was a student of the Initiative on the Digital Economy, which is one of the research centers in the Sloan School, which I'm closely involved in. And Madhav is now a postdoc in the Sloan School in the Initiative on the Digital Economy. We have Robert Mahari, who is a PhD student in the Media Lab in a group called MIT Connection Science, also MIT Human Dynamics. I'm also quite involved with MIT Connection Science. And in addition to going for his PhD, Madhav got a law degree from this really good law school at the other end of Cambridge.
And Robert.
That's Robert.
But I take the compliment.
Robert got his degree from the other law school. I said good things about the law school. And then I met Michael Macrie when he was the CIO finalist. And I was incredibly impressed that he was the CIO of Land of Lakes. And in my mind, I said, why does Land of Lakes need a CIO? I mean, they make butter and it's agriculture. And I learned a gigantic amount from Michael about how sophisticated a lot of the technologies supporting the agricultural industry are. And then he's been the CIO of Subway. Next question, why does a sandwich shop need CIO? And he do. And now he's the CIO of a company that does educational toys for children. So we're going to have a discussion. When we first started discussing this panel, when I first started talking about this panel with Alan Tate, sometime last fall, the hot thing then was Web3. And I thought, okay, so we're going to focus on the impact of Web3 in the future of the digital economy, the internet, and so on. And then on November 30, OpenAI released ChatGPT. And it's taken the world by storm. So clearly, a lot of our conversation, when you look at the impact of advanced technologies, is going to be dominated now by AI and generative AI in particular. And Madhav, let me start with you. In your work at the Initiative on the Digital Economy, first as a PhD candidate and now as a postdoc, you've been very involved in the applications of data analytics and other related digital technologies to business applications. Can you tell us a little bit about the kinds of applications you've been focused on in your research now and over the last few years?
Sure. Thanks for the kind introduction as well, Irving. So much of the work that I've done along with my group is one, building both AI-based solutions for business, and this could be building automated pricing algorithms, building better recommendation systems, building scalable demand systems, and second, investigating their impact on business, especially long-term impact. So that's been what I've been focused on for the past 3-4 years. Now with the coming up of new technology, what we're really trying to understand is what are the economic fundamentals that these technologies change that will allow businesses to make a big shift in the future. And the future isn't here yet, kind of by definition, so we really have to think through what is the core economic fundamental that these technologies will change, and then propagate that system forward to understand what those impacts would be. So much of my time now goes walking by the charts, thinking about these things, running these simulations in my head. So that's the short answer.
And Madhav, I wanted to ask you because, am I correct, your research has been on data and analytics. In my mind, I view analytics and AI and then generative AI as being part of a spectrum. Is that a correct view, or is there a demarcation line between, oh no, Irving, this is analytics and this is data science and this is now AI and machine learning and so on? How do you think about it?
I think it's a fair description to think of it as a spectrum. But if you take like a 30,000 view of it, you want to see them as technologies that are changing the way we do business. And every now and then there comes a technology that brings a sharp kink in that spectrum that changes the way the future could substantially be different from the present. And a lot of hype for that is currently around generative AI, rightly so, and that's what we are investigating. But it's correct that it's a spectrum, but if there is a kink, what does that kink represent in terms of core economic fundamentals, core business strategy? That's what we're trying to get at now.
And the reason I think I wanted to ask you this is because one of the things about embracing AI, and especially generative AI in the future in business, I think, is that if a company has no experience in working with data, and when I say data, I mean big data, large data, not necessarily large language models, but data, and if they don't have experience in all the analytics, data mining, algorithms to do that, the probability that they can do a good job embracing AI, in my opinion, is very small. Do you agree with that, that a precursor to embracing AI, let alone generative AI, is to have experience with data and analytics, or am I being too conservative?
I think that's a fair characterization of how companies will benefit from these technologies. Those who have been on the path of technological progress will see bigger gains. But one of the interesting things about some of these technologies, which I'm quite looking deeply into, is that they substantially lower the barrier of entry for companies which may not have been on this progress. So I'll take a very simple case. It's not that this is going to be scalable, but everybody's played around with ChatGPT, and it provides some technological solution. But the programming language for ChatGPT is just natural language. Mm-hmm. You don't need to know any Python, any C++, anything. Right? And just with English, you can at least get somewhere on top of that technological frontier. So yes, broadly, I think the biggest benefits are going to accrue to firms who have been on the path for this technological progress. Yep. But what some of these technologies may bring is benefit to those who have actually never explored. They don't have that capability, but now suddenly they can.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and we'll explore that a lot more. And Robert, one of the reasons I wanted to make sure you were here is because one of the expectations we have, and you and I have discussed that, is that there will be a lot of legal and regulatory implications to the use of generative AI. And let me say, and you can explain it to our audience, part of the Connection Science group is a really interesting group called computational law, which you are the member, and I believe is run by Daza Greenwood, right. Correct?
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting if you can tell us legal and regulatory, but then explain what this computational law group does and what role you think they can play to help us better understand this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with the second half, kind of explaining, MIT doesn't have a law school. And yet we've found that the law is this interesting profession that, the last big technology breakthrough is probably Microsoft Word, right? The law hasn't changed. And yet every business interacts with law constantly. There's a huge amount of unmet legal need, both on the kind of business side, especially small businesses, but massively on the individual side, criminal and civil law. And so there's this question about whether law can embrace technology, whether we can use technology to better understand the law, predict legal risks, things like that. And so that's really kind of what the computational law group at the Media Lab is doing, kind of thinking of law as yet another profession that ought to embrace technology and thinking about kind of the special implications of the kind of high risk that law usually kind of brings with it. And so, as a discipline that's been built on language, the emergence of these generative large language models lend themselves to application in the law, and there's been lots of reports saying that the law is going to be transformed by generative AI, and I'm happy to kind of chat about that. And we've been doing kind of a lot of research on using LLMs for the legal profession.
So you started already in the computational law group?
Yes, absolutely. So we're doing, just by way of example, we're doing a training for a group of law firms kind of around the country next week.
Oh, wow.
On how they can use LLM. So it's moving quickly. Yeah, it's very scary. But then there's the other side, which is like, what are the legal implications of generative AI, right? And there I think there's kind of, at a high level, two of them. One is the issue of the training data, right? So the way that this data has been compiled is people have gone out and scraped the web. I think most people know this. And all sorts of content is part of this kind of common crawl data set. On top of that, the kind of big unlock with generative large language models is the use of alignment data. So additional kind of structured question answering data, all sorts of additional data. And what people don't realize is the licensing and copyright of that data is often very ambiguous too. You often have thousands of data sets that have been compiled. We've actually started going through all of those and finding that a lot of the licenses are mislabeled. You have a lot of stuff that's only non-commercial. So you have the whole training data, mess. And whether the copying of that data, even just copying it onto a server, potentially violates the copyright of the people who created that training data, let alone using it to create an AI that kind of ironically, maybe tragically, seeks to replace the people who created the training data in the first place. So you have that category of issues. The other category of issues you have is who owns the outputs, right? And if I create some output using the AI, to what degree do I have ownership over that? To what degree is that ownership shared via terms and conditions or via default copyright law with the developers of the generative AI? The Copyright Office has kind of come out and said, well, you can't copyright things that have been created with AI. There's lots of legal precedent, especially around the development of the camera, which is just another technology that kind of fixes reality. That seems to apply, and we can have copyright for images.
And by the way, and that must have happened many years ago.
That was like late 1800s, yeah.
Late 1800s.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the great thing about law. You get to go back and read this stuff. And so you have that kind of category of issues, and frankly, I think that we don't know a lot of the answers to these questions, but we can proceed, I think, judiciously, and there are kind of ways to think about how to use AI in these contexts where you kind of steer clear of some of these issues. So yeah, that's a quick introduction.
Yeah, and one thing that we talked a little bit outside, there was just this interesting music lawsuit. Mm-hmm. You want to tell us a little bit about it? Shearer.
Right, Ed Sheeran. Yeah, I mean, at a high level, there's this question about whether music that sounds similar to other music presents a copyright
You all
issue.
know what we're talking about with Ed Sheeran, and if in case somebody knows, just say 1 second about it.
Well, so I think that the crux of the case was that there was a certain kind of beat melody that was very similar between a song that Ed Sheeran had.
Ed Sheeran is a young English
singer-songwriter.
singer,
Yeah.
right.
And I think the case was brought by Marvin Gaye. Is that right?
His estate.
Yeah, the estate of Marvin Gaye.
The
yeah.
estate of Marvin Gaye.
And so the way you usually test this stuff is there's kind of an objective and a subjective test. So you say, well, objectively, are the elements of music similar in these two pieces? Subjectively, do they sound similar? And then there's this critical question of access. Like, did you actually have access to the song? So for example, if I publish my copyrighted song after your copyrighted song, well, then you couldn't have had access, right? The issue with generative AI is we can kind of assume it has had access to everything.
Yeah.
And so that presents kind of a challenge because the access thing is off the table. And so really we're then arguing about substantial similarity. Although people like to go back to access and say, well, it was in the training data, but then when you've transformed the training data into model weights, something happens in that transformation. There's no memory. But then we do have instances where the generative AI is copying parts of text. I found this is a kind of side note, but it's interesting. We were talking to the US Air Force, and they took redacted documents where they had the originals, and they gave the redacted documents to ChatGPT, and it turns out that ChatGPT can often kind of input the correct information. So that's scary. How did it do that? So there's there are lots of kind of interesting instances, and I think genuinely like the work is ongoing. And like you said, it's November is when it came out. It is now middle of May, and we're all talking about it. So yeah.
So and we'll keep getting back to this question. The world is super excited, and I like to use the analogy of saying, there is this 3-year-old boy that is kicking a soccer ball really well. There goes the next Messi. And we say, this is a 3-year-old boy, let the kid, maybe he's the next Messi, but even Messi didn't go to Barcelona until he was 12, I believe. So you have to give him time. Michael, you've had some fascinating jobs that are so different than many of the jobs we hear about in the CIO Symposium, and we hear about in MIT, Land of Lakes, Subway, now Melissa and Doug. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the uses of technology in each of these jobs you've had? Because I just find that so interesting.
Sure. So part of the role that I believe I play in these organizations is to help them see not only
New solutions to the problems they have today, but also what's possible to set themselves beyond what their competitors are doing. How do you establish that moat? How do you create a new competitive advantage? By leveraging the geniuses in the world, right? No one company, has a monopoly on people, and leveraging people like the individual sitting next to me and their ideas to bring them to your company and match it with their core values,
their products can really differentiate your organization. And so I've had a lot of luck in doing this in a lot of different ways, some of them very mundane, which we'll talk about ChatGPT
here in a second, and other ones very innovative. At Land O'Lakes,
we looked at all the body of knowledge in the United States, all the land
grant universities, and
said they had solved all these agricultural problems, but farmers were using less than 1% of them. And how come? And what we figured out was, and our insight was that it was an economic problem, not a solution problem. And I'll never forget a kind of an epiphany moment for the team I was leading at the time. We were talking to entrepreneurs just like this or thought leaders, and this one person had a great
solution around how we're going to monitor crops and
make it better and make everything work better. And they said, and I could put this sensor and it does everything, and it was fabulous technology, and each sensor per acre was $500. And the crops we were dealing with corn, and if you understand corn farmers, well, they make on a great day $40 an acre, a home run day $80 an acre,
and some days lose $40 an acre.
So we put the target at $1. or less on where we needed to be, which technology could not get us there. And we figured out how to put together the things together to create one of the first satellite imagery monitoring platforms. But the innovations were really around pulling these things together and doing it in a way that used AI to process terabytes and terabytes of secondhand data every night and prep that for farmers.
So that's what I found so incredibly impressive, that here is the production of milk and butter, and all of a sudden satellite imaging and analysis is helping the farmers and the ranchers, I guess, do their job. And this sounds fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, AI worked with us on, helped us there, and this was 10 years ago, right? So AI has continued to develop into this seminal moment we have now with ChatGPT. But I've used it in my past on plant identification, bug identification. At Subway, we were experimenting in voice activation and translating those voices over to orders to reduce the labor needs in the facilities. And even at Melissa and Doug, while we will never use technology in our products at Melissa and Doug because we're focused on early childhood development, what we will use it for is to better our business in the back office, in areas to make legal more efficient, to improve our forecasting, both product mix and consumer behavior forecasting. We'll use it to hopefully reduce our legal costs and paralegal work, right, that goes on. And then Madhav, to your point, which I want to highlight, is one of the things I was struggling with is we want to get better at forecasting. We know we're going to need a big data organization to do that, but I'm a mid-market, smaller size company where I'm working right now, and I don't have the ability to hire those data scientists in that budget. Well, now with ChatGPT, wow, what can I do at a much lower cost to really bring the best of data science into my organization? So, there's a lot of opportunity out there, and I think that what these guys are working on and many others are going to have a massive change in the way we get work done.
By the way, with agriculture, I just saw maybe earlier this week that there is a huge problem in the US in general, but mostly in the West and Midwest, with water. And I was reading something about some people in the Central Valley in California who they had to be careful about taking showers because they don't have enough water. But then what the article said is, forget the showers, the vast majority of the water is used in agriculture, but the vast majority, and I'm wondering how some of the technologies and satellites and sensors, couldn't they help make agriculture much more efficient in terms of their use of water? Because that feels like a huge problem around the world.
There's a lot of technologies out there. Israel leading in the agricultural sector on water management. There are companies in the United States who can manage those pivots, those big sprinkler systems you see out there. And they are AI based. They will now drop water and nutrients only where they need them. And so that technology is infusing. But again, like everything we do, there's a change management problem, there's an education problem, and there's a legal problem. Biggest problem right now we have with water management in California is actually, in my opinion, the historical legal rights system to water, where farmers can pump as much as they want without paying a dime, based on these really old laws that if we're ever going to get control of it, we have to think differently about how we're going to solve these problems. And they're not just tech problems.
No, I realized I was about to say, no matter what problem we talk about in the US, eventually we need a lawyer involved to help us adjudicate it. Before we go on with our dialogue, let me ask, any questions from the audience here, please?
Thank you. On the legal question, sometimes it feels like we need to go back to first principles or 19th century case law. But what do you actually think that law should reflect?
Don't forget the Constitution.
Yeah. Law should reflect how we want society to operate. So how do you think the law should think about these massive data sets? Are they our collective knowledge? So what does the whole panel think if you were going to make up law from scratch?
Yeah, so it feels like the application of the fair use exception here seems fairly reasonable for kind of two reasons. One, just like from a societal point of view, I think that although there are clearly problematic use cases of generative AI, on the whole, this seems like a good technology that we like. If we said you needed to bilaterally license with every person who created training data, that would essentially kill the industry, right? So that seems unrealistic. On the other hand, like it seems like you could imagine some sort of data trust that going forward, like backward looking is going to be hard, but going forward, when I create a painting, when I create poetry, whatever, I'm going to give the administration of the copyright over to some sort of large data trust. And that data trust will then bilaterally negotiate with OpenAI some sort of rate. And that then is distributed back down to me. This is kind of similar to what we do for compulsory licensing with music, where there's a statutory rate. If I want to create a record of somebody's music, I can pay them a statutory rate per copy. That seems kind of roughly equivalent. I also think we want to be sure to continue incentivizing human creation. I think looking, you asked us to look 10 years into the future. There is going to be this future where most of the content on the internet has been generated by AI. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be harder and harder to train the next generation on like new human creation. So, continuing to incentivize human creativity, rewarding that is going to be important. So we want to kind of balance those two. I don't know if the other panelists.
Yeah, I can pitch. I have no legal experience, so I'll stay away from that. But I can give an economic perspective. And this is maybe thinking too tangentially, but here is where kind of going beyond NFTs, where Web3 can really help. If most so what's the easy part? If you look at the economic fundamentals, digital goods are basically the marginal cost of reproduction is zero, right? And they're essentially non-rival. If I consume them, I cannot prevent somebody else from consuming them. Now, how does Web3 help here? If every digital product in the future is tokenized, then their use can be tracked. They can essentially be made rivalrous. And subsequent future payments can then be, maybe in that world, be organized. Again, this is maybe wishful thinking, but this is where if Web3 has a useful use case, it's securing digital identity as well as use case of digital products. And maybe 20, 30 years down the line, this could be a reality.
And it's interesting when we talk about these issues, there has been quite a lot written on the difference to embracing new technologies between the US and the European Union. And the European Union is much more conservative when it comes to that, making sure you do no damage and regulating things. And in some things, they've done a terrific job, like GDPR. Would you say a lot of the US has much more embraced GDPR? In the US, we often say, go ahead and do it, get it to the market, break things, and then we'll fix it. And that's why we have Web3 now, because everybody realizes that Web 2, the social media web, was not this democratic thing that enabled everybody to talk to everybody else, but created all this polarization among people. People didn't behave well. A few companies got huge about everything else. And people are very worried, okay, so we screwed up Web 3, Web 2, can we fix it in Web 3? And I don't know if we can. I think it's too early to tell. So these are really, the reason I like this discussion a lot is because, yes, we're talking about technology, but we're talking about the impact of technology on business, the economy, and society at large, and boy, is that complicated.
So circling back to the opening session on regulations, with Web3 and GDPR and similar laws where you have the right to be forgotten and other regulations, is Web3 ever going to be compatible, given its democratization and wide distribution, with regulations such as the right to be forgotten?
Any of you want to take that? I don't know.
It's a tough question. There's maybe a legal answer to that, but I can probably try to answer it from the technology point of view. I think there's some core fundamentals. So one of the things is that data on Web3 is pseudonymous. So it's not unless you put your identity on it, one cannot necessarily know who that person is. So in some ways, maybe there is a way to get around that. But Web3 is currently, it has gone through this hype cycle, then a big crash. So we are still waiting to see how it will substantially evolve in the future. But at least from my point of view, I think if you look at, for example, GDPR, on one hand, it's a privacy regulation. On one hand, it's a very bad regulation for competition. Generally, the impact has been that smaller firms have suffered at the cost of bigger firms, right? So to me, that's maybe not the benchmark policy for us to think about Web3 as well. Though point well taken, if Web3 at least promises to be this democratic thing, how will it at least have user privacy built into it? I think that's a mechanism that needs to be designed specifically in the technology. I don't have a very clear answer to that yet, but maybe there's a legal angle to it.
Well, I think there's the short answer that if you have distributed ledgers, it's really hard for me to say, so you have the right to be forgotten and the right to rectification. So if there's an incorrect entry in one of the records, unless there's consensus that we're going to update that entry, it will be hard to do that, and it's hard to kind of enforce that. There's a similar issue with generative AI, right? So like if there was an incorrect record about me somewhere in the training data, and that's then pulled up, how do I go about that? And we're currently actually doing work on there. You can kind of distinguish between this massive lake of training data and then fine-tuning data or prompt data on top of it. And essentially, kind of our general approach has been we can make sure that whatever prompt data we feed a system is up to date and is updatable. And then that will generally take care of the issues of updatability in the training data. And that's kind of literally like ongoing research, so we'll see. But it's kind of an open question. It's tough. Yeah.
So another down the rabbit hole kind of question there. When you were talking about contributing data to a common location, common store, first thing I thought was create commons. They thought a lot about the licensing there. Contribute, but don't derive, these kinds of things. And the question I had then was, well, clearly the training data has violated all of those. And if you get this new commons, could something like that work, or will it still just, this governance process just not work at all?
It's I think an open question. So there have been proposals to say, we should have a Creative Commons that's human only, and things like that. You could also imagine that this will lead to a more closed down internet, right? Because people will want to protect things. And we're also still waiting on court decisions about GitHub and Stack Overflow and all of those places that say, hey, you just killed our business overnight. I think it's an open and it's a tough question.
Let me make a comment, because these questions have been excellent, because they really make the case why historically transformative technologies take decades to be deployed in the marketplace. And this is research that has been taking place in the Initiative on the Digital Economy. Eric Brynjolfsson did quite a bit of that research and analyzed that. And just as an example, Edison invented the light bulb in the 1880s, but it wasn't until the assembly line in manufacturing with Henry Ford in the 1920s, and then the advent of consumer appliances, washing machines, refrigerators, and the wiring of the country, that you saw the economic impact of electricity. And that was in the 40, 50 years later. I'm not saying it's going to take 40, 50 years, but with generative AI, we sometimes think about, oh my God, am I behind? And notice all the questions we don't have answers to. And by the way, in fact, I like to write quite a bit about AI. And one of the things I recently wrote about, if you look at AI, it sort of reminds me of Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Technologies. That is, if I may paraphrase him, because on the one hand, you have OpenAI and Google and Facebook and a few other large companies doing this incredible stuff. On the other hand, you have survey after survey from McKinsey and Accenture and many other companies that keep saying that in the vast majority of companies, AI is still in the experimental stage. And they haven't really deployed it at scale. Michael, I mean, these are surveys, so this is real data that they are talking about. Is that a correct, do you agree with that conclusion?
Yeah, I do. And in speaking with my peers, even getting into generative AI, you know, half are scared to death about the legal implications and the risk that it could offer to their role, and the other half are out there experimenting. And even when you experiment, you got to be careful that your own private data doesn't end up in the training set by mistake because you used a public version versus a private version. So there's quite a bit of hesitancy and there's quite a bit of excitement at the same time. And I think, you know, I think you're going to see the adoption of AI in very targeted work packages. The AI is going to get me this type of work done. It's going to get me this type of benefit. So therefore, I'm going to take the leap and make the risk. I also think, to the more long-term questions, there is a role for regulatory in Web 3.0 and Web 2.0 that has to be there. I mean, we've invented one of the most addictive substances known to man. It's caused political discourse. It's caused addictive behavior in children. It's caused anxiety in teenagers, including worse things. And we still haven't regulated this thing at all, really, in the United States. And so, you know, it is time to get a little bit more educated with the help of academia and the real research, and I think that has a role to play. But, you know, business isn't going to stop and wait on one hand, but we're also not going to plow ahead forward, because a lot of these will take time to mature. I mean, I still thought my son would never drive a car. This was 10, 15 years ago. I'm still waiting for that driverless car to show up in my neighborhood. And it's been stuck in San Francisco for the last decade. So, you know, this stuff does take a decade or two to work itself out, but it just goes to show, I think IP law is going to have to be revisited.
And let me say,
greatly.
Michael, I'll get to you in a second. I just listened to a really good podcast about the cruise cars in San Francisco. And the only way the cruise cars work, self-driving cars, is because Cruise is owned by GM. And GM is spending billions a year with an infrastructure supporting those cars, because the cars get stuck. And, you know, you have to do something, and it's hard to make money unless you have GM behind you or some other company. So just more reason why the technologies are exciting, but their economic deployment takes time. Michael?
I have a quick comment and a question. The comment is, I think the McKinsey survey stuff is off because everybody in this room is old enough to remember shadow apps. I think there's a lot of shadow GPT going on. I can say that with high degree of confidence in higher education based on every single niece, nephew, and relative I have who is doing or not doing homework. That's the comment. The question is, in regards to the important point about flawed data, you know, in the data sets, I'm very curious about the quality of research that can look into the BERT, that can look into the transformer, and track where that data came from. The original sin of OpenAI GPT is that it gives you really good responses, but it doesn't tell you where those responses came from. Who is doing the disentangling research that will allow you to say that this quote-unquote hallucination came from X because the probability was assigned as Y rather than Z?
So I can take a crack and then.
Sure. Yeah,
so I mean, the field of explainability is huge, and there's lots of people doing the very difficult task that you just laid out, right? Going all the way back to the training data. We've kind of set our sights at something a lot more humble, which is to say, if I have the pre-trained model that can do all sorts of things in general, And then I have a repository of data that's specific to my organization. And I wanted to fill out a template. I wanted to complete, a standard proposal, whatever it is. I'm going to first find that probative document in my internal data lake, then check for kind of sensitive information, give that to the pre-trained model as part of a prompt, and say, given this new information, fill out this document. And what we think we can do is we can have an audit trail between that internal data lake, the organizational one, and what is sent to the pre-trained model, and say, okay, this is what you gave it, this is the output you got. It's a lot less than what you're saying, right? But it does get us some of the way, because if we screw up, we can go back and say, oh, well, you used last year's template, that's why. Or you used, this person's template, and this person doesn't write really clear emails, so you should use that person's template. So we have that ability to trace, auditability, and we have updatability, because we have freedom to change that information.
Can you give a time frame for that?
Like research, I think, next 6 months. Deployed in the industry, 10 years? I don't know. Hard.
Less than that.
Hopefully less than that. But we have a white paper on transformers.mit.edu, so if you want to take a look.
But Michael, let me give you another potential answer to that question. The economies had a big issue on generative AI, was it last week or 2 weeks ago? And one of the issues was an essay on the long-term impact of generative AI. And the author, a very good reporter, Ludwig Siegele, said, to get a feeling about it, let me talk about 3 historically transformative technologies. The first 2 are pretty straightforward. The browser that gives us access to information, now with large language models, as you said, maybe we can access them more in English and so on. The printing press, which everybody agrees, was superb at disseminating information. The third one was more intriguing, and he said, is the work of Sigmund Freud. And then he explained. So can we live with something in our midst that makes very interesting decisions and predictions, but we don't understand how it does it? And he said, well, wait a second, Irving. He didn't say Irving. Guess what Sigmund Freud contributed to the world? He explained that we have a conscious mind, where when we behave a certain way and people say, why did Irving say this? Then I can say, well, this is why I do it. But then he said, and we have the unconscious mind. And even though a lot of people say, well, Freud is outmoded, he doesn't quite apply, I don't know anybody who says that his psychoanalytic theories of the unconscious mind don't apply. So it turns out that we are surrounded by entities whose behavior we don't always understand, nor can we predict them, and that's called human beings. And for example, anybody who has children, teenagers, or ourselves will realize we often behave in a way. And by the way, this was
I will ask you offline whether it's your id or your ego answering that question.
And what is fascinating is, can we get used to dealing with tools that make predictions, but we don't understand why they made the predictions, because the neural networks that they use to make the predictions are all just mathematically complicated statistics. So they are what some people have called stochastic parrots. They're just making predictions. And if you say, well, why don't you dig into it? Well, it would be like saying, open up Irving's brain and you'll understand his thinking. Turns out, I don't think that's going to work. So you could say, well, send Irving to see a psychiatrist and maybe, no, but I'm being totally serious. We need a lot of research to develop tools that help us probe about why a big AI model made a decision, but we will not know with total precision. We will probably only be able to say statistically, this is likely the reason. And then we as humans have to decide, are we comfortable with that or not?
You have half a minute for each panelist.
Okay, so last thing, is this a good thing or not? I want you each to tell us, are you positive if we do the right work?
Right, that's a big question. I think generally, kind of being a more pessimistic person, I'm quite optimistic about this. I think the technology, it substantially lowers the barrier of entry for a lot of people as well as a lot of organizations to come have a level playing field. So I'm quite excited about that. I think it also allows, one of the big changes it allows it makes it pushes out our production frontier where we can do more with less, or at the same cost to be able to do just more.
Okay.
And I really like that part.
Robert.
Perfect. So I agree with all of that, but I think everyone will be able to do more with less, which means that it's great for business, it's great for efficiency. I think we're going to see some really creepy applications too. And I'm challenging regulators to come up with solutions to them.
You have the last word?
Well, absolutely, this is going to change business for good or for bad, whether we like it or not. So we better get our heads around it. And to your point, Irving, we better get comfortable with not understanding, because when we get to quantum computing, we still haven't figured out how quantum mechanics actually work, but we use it every day now. So
And let me urge everybody here to go to the next lecture from Professor David Otter, who is going to talk about fascinating stuff. Thank you.